Okay, we're about to go live. Just another minute. Thank you all for your patience. Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us so much. It's wonderful to have you all here for an exciting panel, exciting roundtable for this really important topic of the future of batteries. And I think hopefully if many of you are excited as we are, as it is a really interesting time, I think, to talk about the battery industry. And I'm extremely delighted to have a wonderful panel and wonderful speakers with me and with us today. But before we go to the panel, maybe if you go on the next slide, please. Just quickly for this Battery MBA roundtable. And yeah, big thanks to everyone joining us live on LinkedIn or YouTube or watching this afterwards. It's wonderful to have you. And already a bit of a quick outlook. We got three amazing panelists for today. Also here, Julia and Andreas, going to talk a lot about this, and hopefully Niels as well, about really the latest developments in the battery landscape from really different aspects. So I'm really excited for this conversation. But we're going to go there in a minute. Before we do so, we just want to give you a quick overview of who we are as Battery Associates, where many of you might be streaming this live from right now, or also, of course, the Battery MBA, because this is actually the last panel, the last session we have for this current Battery MBA cohort, which is the 13th cohort, or the 12th cohort of the Battery MBA. Wonderful. If we go to the next slide, please. And this is just really quick. This is just a really quick slide about us with Battery Associates. You have an idea who we are. If you haven't met us yet, welcome. It's wonderful to meet you all. With Battery Associates, we have the mission to create a sustainable world through the power of people and battery innovation. We do this in a couple of different ways. Battery EDU is definitely part of that, and that's the Battery MBA program where many of you are currently participating. It's wonderful to have you all here, as well as live, but also some of the alumni streaming this live as well. Then we also have our battery lab, which is more innovation arm, where we're developing hardware and software specifically for battery testing, and also have other couple interesting projects ongoing. And then we also have Battery Pro, which is more our advising and consulting arm, where we're also advising really a range of companies, but also governments around the world on this important topic of batteries. This is just quickly about us with Battery Associates. And now if you go on the next slide, please. This is just a quick slide for this Battery MBA program, which this is again part of. We're really proud of, I think, the progress we have made over the last now pretty much 4 years for the Battery MBA. It's been really exciting. We're really thrilled about all the profiles who have been joining us. Again, this cohort has been absolutely amazing again, the 12th cohort, but again, we already had quite a few cohorts before that. It's really a program to make you a leader in the battery field. A lot of current and future battery leaders are in this program from really around the world. We now have over 50 countries represented across the cohorts, which we're super thrilled by. It's really open to anybody from technical backgrounds to business backgrounds, C-level, as well as also some students. And again, if you look at some of the companies where we have alumni from, it's really a testament, I think, to the program, and also all the amazing alumni which have been joining us over the past years. One thing we're also really proud of is our about 30% women, which are really important to us as well. Again, we really want to foster diversity also in the battery sector, so it's something we're really pushing for. And again, we have this 95% here recommendation rate of the program, as well as 99% it met or exceeded the expectation. Again, something we're super proud of. And again, it's an ever-growing program, which we're really excited for. And now we actually, if you go on the next slide, you can see that now actually there's over 590 alumni with this current cohort about to finish. We're super thrilled by. And yeah, if you're interested in joining the cohort, next cohort in January, please make sure to apply by the 18th of December, because that's the application deadline. So you can join us in time for the 13th of January to join a really exciting cohort. We as a team have been interviewing many of you. I think quite a few of you might be streaming this right now. Absolutely amazing. really, really exciting profiles again from all around the world doing amazing things in the battery space. So hopefully many of you, if you're interested in joining, get in touch with us. We'd love to see you there. Brilliant. I think this was just quickly there. And then just one last thing here, which I think has been also quite exciting. We're in this world now where we can meet each other again in person. Again, super excited, all of you joining us online. But if we go on the next slide, we can also see we do quite a few meetups, and we would love to bring also our battery alumni together, really from all around the world, from the US and China and UK, Germany, and all around. Just a few of them here for some of the recent meetups we have done. So alumni, super excited for that. Also lecturers are really welcome to join as well, and panelists. We had some of them join us as well. If you go to the next slide. These are just some impressions from some of the latest events. We have been at some of the conferences. We brought quite a few alumni together. So again, we love to also meet you in person. So just as an invitation, maybe don't be a stranger if you're going to any events, or if you're an alumni and you're going to any exciting events, please let us know so we can also make sure we connect you with other alumni attending these events, because that's definitely one thing I love is to meet all of you alumni and lecturers in person at many of events, including, for example, Julia, who I tend to meet as well at quite a few conferences, which is wonderful. Great. I think with this, if we go to the next slide, please. Now here for the panel, and I think to introduce our first speaker, I will pass on to Shada to introduce our first speaker for the day.
Thank you very much, Simon. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone, wherever you're joining us. Thank you all for joining us today. We're here to talk about the future of batteries, an industry that's not only transforming the way we store and use energy, but also reshaping the global economy and our approach to sustainability. We're very fortunate enough to have an outstanding lineup of experts with us today, each of whom brings a unique perspective to the table. From innovation in recycling and circular economies to sustainable electrification policies and cutting-edge advancement in battery manufacturing. Today's panelists are deeply involved in shaping the future of this field. So let us briefly introduce them to you, and I'm gonna start with our first panelist. He's a bit late, I think, but hopefully he will be joining us. First, we have Niels Steinbrecher, who's a managing director at SKTES Sustainable Battery Solution. He's pioneering sustainable battery solution across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. His work focuses on closing the loop of lithium-ion batteries, recycling them effectively, and advancing circular economy solutions. Niels has a background in both business and electrical engineering and master thesis on sustainable transport. And with this, let's continue with our second guest, Julia, and I hand over to Simon for that.
Thank you so much, Shada. Yeah, and Julia Poliscanova is a Senior Director of Vehicles and E-Mobility at Transport Environment. She focuses on emissions, sustainable batteries, and critical raw materials for vehicles, electrification, and supply chains across Europe. She also represents T&E on the Global Battery Alliance board and advises Vulcan Energy Resources. Wonderful to have you, Julia.
Good evening, everyone. Really great to be here at this very topical time for the European battery ambitions.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Julia. So our last but not least guest is Dr. Andreas Maier. He's Chief Operating Officer at Morrow Batteries, who oversees the end-to-end process of supply chain development, manufacturing, and quality assurance. Previously, vice president at Samsung SDI, he has also developed strategies for automotive leaders in China and Korea while working as a consultant at McKinsey and Hyundai. Hi, Andreas. Nice to see you today.
Yes, it's a great pleasure to be here today, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Shada. And yeah, I can kick it off with Julia, because I know there's a lot of really recent developments, and I think you're quite outspoken on them as well, which is really appreciated. And maybe we can start a bit by talking about some about the recent developments related to the battery manufacturing sector, which definitely have highlighted quite a few challenges faced by several companies. So maybe if you could share a bit about some, opinions, what could be some of the main reasons and what are some of the lessons learned so far. And maybe you can also, if you want to share really the latest developments and your assessment of them.
No, absolutely happy to share a few thoughts and answer this very critical question. Look, it's been quite clear now for some months then that European efforts to scale the battery value chain have taken a bumpy ride. There's been a number of projects either delayed or even cancelled all across Europe. And most notably, of course, just a few days ago, we have all learned in my rather sad news that Northvolt has now filed for bankruptcy in the US, and Northvolt was probably Europe's closest European homegrown company to commercializing lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. On our account as TNE, we always update our pipeline of battery investments in Europe today. Even though we still see a healthy pipeline, we also acknowledge that only 10% of all the announcements to date actually are likely to go ahead as planned, and over 60% of all the different plants in battery capacity in Europe, all across Europe, are at risk of either being delayed or cancelled altogether. So what are some of the lessons? Maybe I'll highlight 3 broad areas, and I hope we have more time to delve into detail, for example, around policies later in our discussion. But the first one is, while it's not for me to comment on individual companies, I will not be commenting, what I think about Northvolt. Everyone on LinkedIn and social media has an opinion. I think it is clear that it is important to focus and not to do everything at the same time, and first learn the core, a quite difficult business of cell manufacturing and really excel at that, focus, and then expand and do more vertical integration. And I hope that's something that European companies will do. But the second lesson, and a much more important lesson for me, is actually for European decision makers and everyone in the battery ecosystem. Failure is part of innovation. It's never just a road like that, and we've all planned everything and we get there. There will be bumps on the road. A company, for example, Northvolt, can get a batch of battery cells wrong, learn from that, and then actually do another one right or completely right. This is how learning and innovation goes. And one example I can bring is actually BYD. So BYD's first electric vehicle, model electric vehicle taxi that they launched in 2010 called E6 was a complete flop. It was terrible, performance wasn't there, the sales were not. They went back to the drawing board, and 10 years later they brought their Tan and Han models, and today BYD is #1 global manufacturer in electric vehicles, but also one of the top in batteries. So failure can be part of that. But what is really necessary is patience and stamina of the ecosystem, governments and investors to get there. Which brings me to the third message that I hope we get a chance to talk a lot more further on. And this is about the fact that scaling batteries in Europe won't be easy. It will be a long, bumpy ride. And it's just really important for policymakers, investors, and everyone in the ecosystem to have this patience, to have the long-term vision, to have a reliable and clear policy that leads to that, as well as support, be it on the trade side or on the financing side. And if that constantly goes away, and if we throw baby with bathwater, we're just never going to get there. So buckle your seatbelts. It won't be easy. It's a make or break moment, but now is not the time to give up.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure we're going to have some more discussions about this later on as well, and some more of your learnings from looking at this. And I really appreciate also you sharing, there is definitely learnings you can also take from other companies and some of their developments. And I think we should definitely do that as well. Fantastic. Shada, would you like to ask maybe the first question to Andreas?
Yeah, now a little bit of, we talk about a little bit the European homegrown battery manufacturing challenges. Now we turn to Andreas and talk about a little bit Morrow Batteries chemistry choice. So we would like to hear your perspective, Andreas, on why Morrow has chosen to focus on LFP and aluminum chemistry specifically, and heavy machinery and BESS as an application. Can you just enlighten us about your company's choice, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk through that. I mean, first of all, maybe a few words about the Morrow Batteries. I mean, we are also one of the European-grown battery manufacturing initiatives. We are located in the south of Norway, and part of our strategy is to build sustainable and also cost-effective batteries. Now you may wonder, how can Norway produce cost-effective batteries? Actually, Norway is a a relatively high-cost country. But to make a cost-effective batteries actually motivated our choice of materials. And currently we are distinguishing 2 generations of battery chemistries as part of in our strategy. The first one, as you correctly said, is LFP. And LFP we have chosen as our generation 1 because we aimed for quick access to the market, which we believed when we formulated that strategy that we couldn't get with NMC and automotive, because that would have been the other choice to go into the volume market and supply to the European automotive industry. But we recognize that timelines would be long, and getting access to large volumes in the automotive industry would do so too. So we selected LFP as our entry chemistry, and then go into generation 2 with LNMO. And LNMO is a cobalt-free material. It has a higher manganese content, a lower nickel content than, for example, NMC, and therefore makes the cathode active material more cost-effective than NMC. It's lower in energy density, but it delivers higher energy densities in combination with graphite anode than LFP does. And that was actually the reason for the choice of the materials. And of course, with LNMO, we currently have 2 different anode materials, one niobium-based and the other one graphite. And with the niobium-based anode material, we plan to penetrate markets like heavy mobility, so markets that currently mostly apply LTO type chemistries. Yeah, so that's kind of should summarize our choice of materials and the strategy behind it.
Okay, excellent. It's very, very exciting to hear a European manufacturer focusing on LFP first, and then LMNO, other chemistries, especially cobalt-free, which will be the feature of cathode chemistries. And I would like to also, Andreas, just continue to ask you, since we build on the discussion now related to homegrown European gigafactories, and my question would be, how can we actually build resilient supply chain, battery supply chain in Europe? How can we ensure also responsible sourcing of materials?
Yes, I think before answering that, I think the question is more, why should we do it, right? Because the alternative is to source the materials where they currently come from. I mean, of course, the percentages may vary, but if you look at all battery materials, 80% are currently produced in China, probably another 10% or even more in Korea, and then a portion in Japan, and then probably about 5% in the rest of the world. And that includes cathode active materials, anode active materials, separators, then copper foils, aluminum foils, and electrolytes and other components you require, conductive agents, binders, mechanical parts, and so on. And they do it currently at very low cost, especially in China. It's produced at very low cost and at very good quality and at very good performance, or with very good performance. So of course the question is, why then should we build it anywhere else if you have such a good supply chain already established? I mean, the question that it always comes down to, or the answer it always comes down to, is that we want to get independent of production in especially in Asia, in China in particular, and build a home supply chain to become independent. Now, I mean, looking at what is already available in Europe, of course, there are producers of all the components in Europe already, of what I have listed, whether it's anode active material, cathode active material, whether it's LFP or NMC or other more innovative materials. You find producers in Europe. Same for electrolyte, same for others, for separators and so on. But what it comes down is that most of them not produce at scale. Most of them have not a strong, I would say, quality track record. There is probably reservation from established suppliers to work with them because the materials are not yet validated, and therefore it's difficult at least to implement those, or it will still take years to implement those in any bigger programs, I would call it, like automotive programs or energy storage programs. And then the third element is price. And we have just done a benchmark of kind of developing a cell with European based supply chain, and yeah, I mean it will add a premium. I cannot say how much premium here, but it will add a significant premium, and which customer is willing to pay for that? Only because they get a battery cell with only European produced materials from European makers. And even from a Chinese supplier producing in Europe, it already adds some not insignificant price premium. So that's the situation where we are. Of course, we have to continue the effort for the reason of developing independent supply chains, but what is definitely a fact, it will add a price premium. And the question is the market willing to pay for that?
Excellent, Andreas. Yeah, thank you very much. It is really, really challenging to build our own supply chain because of the scale, the quality, and then of course the cost. Thank you for touching on those critical points. Just quick reminder: if you have any questions for our panelists, Julia and Andreas, please put your questions in LinkedIn for the audience who are listening to us now live. And I will hand over to Simon for the next question.
Thanks so much. And of course, also all the Battery MBA participants here live currently with us. And feel free to also put the questions in the chat as well. I think you already touched on the point, Andreas, of raw materials and of course and where they're coming from, etc. And of course that links up to traceability. And there's a question I'd like to ask to you, Julia, also about traceability, especially with the introduction of the battery passport, which is to come in Europe in 2027. I know you're also a board member of the Global Battery Alliance, which is really pushing the topic as well. So maybe you could share a bit more of kind of your assessment of its implementation, how realistic it is to be implemented, and what way. That could be really amazing. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for the question. Maybe before I answer that, I just wanted to build up on some really great points that Andreas made, and just to add on, why should we bother to do it here in Europe? Why is it so important? So beyond some of the more obvious questions you can think about, like resilience, etc., there's actually a very meaningful climate reduction coming from a local supply chain. So we've done a calculation where we compared a largely European supply chain with lithium coming directly from Chile, for example, into Europe, etc., compared to a China-controlled supply chain today. And we see that already with the current European grid, on average, we would save 37% of all CO2 emissions if we move that supply chain to Europe. We are talking about big industrial facilities. So this is more or less almost the size of CO2 emissions of the country like China the country of Czech Republic over the entire plants that we have in Europe. And if Europe moves as we are to a largely renewable system, the climate benefits rise to 2/3, so over 60%. So the climate benefits are really direct, despite some of the, I would argue, initial costs that you have as a premium, because eventually when it scales, the costs go down. Now, answering the question about traceability, of course, is really critical. It's also very critical to the credibility of this value chain, understanding, and then dealing with how things are done, for example, at mines that are mining things like cobalt and nickel. And here there are a number of challenges. Yes, Europe will require all batteries on its market to have battery passport, and indeed there are global initiatives like the GBA who are doing that. When we look at the battery passport, there's at least two challenges that I see, and then in addition there is a bigger challenge than the passport on its own. So the first two challenges are just getting this information in a comparable format from everyone in your supply chain. So you might be based in Germany, for example, producing vehicles. Your supply might be producing batteries, even in Europe, maybe in China. But behind that, there are just so many smaller players without any systems of traceability today. So in some cases, products will come from many different mines, and they will be all smelted in the same smelter. And that smelter can't even tell you all the mines where they come from, let alone what conditions were met in those mines. So collecting all of this information is a really huge exercise. And there's now a number of companies that are trying to do that and are trying to support companies to do that. But here comes the next challenge, and an equally important one. How do you make sure that that information is not just correct, but it's constantly correct? So it might be correct on day one, but who knows if it's still the case on day 3. And here, because the supply chains are constantly changing, comes another challenge. What we believe at CNE is that it's really critical to not only rely on online traceable tools, but also be on the ground and conduct regular audits, send your teams to the mine, speak with people, engage, don't only speak with companies, speak with local communities and workers in the company to get a full picture of what the situation is. So this is around the battery passport. We are still hopeful that the battery passport will come in place in 2027. However, the one final major challenge I would add, ultimately the passport and the traceability tools is an information collection exercise. What is significantly more difficult is then to act on that information to actually improve the situation on the ground. And this is what the European battery regulation is trying to do with its due diligence provisions, where the traceability is just the first piece. Then comes a huge iterative exercise with all of your supplies to improve. So just to give you an example, you can trace your supply chain in Indonesia, and you can discover that some of the companies are contributing to cutting rainforest, for example, so deforestation. What do you do? Yes, you can just say, well, I won't buy from them anymore. That's not going to help anyone. There will be other companies who will buy from them, and deforestation will continue. The right approach would be then to say, right, this is an industry-wide problem. It's not just something that the company does. There's challenges in Indonesia. How do I work together with suppliers in Indonesia, maybe some smaller companies, the government, to put in place policy frameworks that would reduce deforestation, to put in place monitoring and practices and help with some technology to those companies that deforestation actually does not take place. And this is how you actually deliver real impact on the ground, by reducing, in this case, deforestation in Indonesia, as opposed to simply canceling out that supplier without real impact in the real world. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. I think there's some really, really important points. And yeah, very excited to, of course, monitor together with you how these things are panning out. Shada, would you like to ask the next question?
Yes, thank you, Simon. So my question will be for Andreas again. And we know Norway's commitment to renewable energies. And I wanted to ask the Morrow Batteries perspective, what role does this commitment to renewable energy and sustainability in Norway play in shaping Morrow Batteries' strategy and decision-making and its competitive advantage maybe in the global market? Can you comment on that, Andreas?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this the renewable energy was actually part of the reason why we established the company in southern Norway, because renewable energy is quite abundant there. We can power our operations even if we scale them to our future plan of more than 40 gigawatt hours, with 100% renewable energy coming from hydropower. In fact, Norway has only renewable energy. Most of it comes from hydropower, part of it from wind power, and a small part from also solar power, but really the majority comes from hydropower. And Norway is also a net exporter of electricity, so green energy is really quite available here. However, we also all know that the cell production is only part of the CO2 footprint of a battery cell. And we believe that when we produce a LNMO type cell, that we can reduce on a cell level the CO2 compared to average energy mix, for example, to China, the CO2 footprint of the cell by 30%. And then, of course, the rest has to come from the upstream supply chain. And our future strategy, when we move into the LNMO type of chemistry, is to also bring the cathode active material production locally. And we have also, of course, options to also source the graphite, which is another big contributor of the CO2 footprint to Norway. I mean, there are local supply options. However, as I pointed out, it really also still takes time to develop those and to make them performance, quality, and price competitive. But yeah, that is where we see the really our kind of competitive edge, I want to call it, to produce sustainable or higher sustainable battery cells. And we still have we have the belief that this will be a differentiator in the future. However, what we also the responses we get from the market is everybody asks for higher sustainability and lower CO2 footprint, but it's more seen as a given rather than a differentiator that customers are willing to pay extra for it. And yeah, I'm sorry that I'm not more positive about that, but that's kind of the reality of the market at the moment.
Thank you, Andreas, for this realistic. But I'm very, very proud and very happy to hear we can actually make more sustainable batteries in Northern Europe, in Norway at the moment. And so I am at this moment we can take a couple of questions coming up on LinkedIn live now, and I will hand it over to Simon, and he will ask the question.
Thanks so much, Sheda and Andreas. And I think now we have a question also another on Europe. And of course, I would love to also expand the discussion as well. We can go into other regions, and I think we'll definitely do so also, at least in the second part. But there's now another question on Europe, focused from Isigul on LinkedIn. And she asked, how do you see the future of battery production of next generation batteries, such as sodium-ion in Europe? And maybe Julia, sodium-ion, solid state, anything you want to add to technologies which are seen as future next generation technologies?
Thanks for this question, and I am very sorry if I am been a little bit controversial, but I do not believe in all those people in Europe that say, well, we missed the current boat on the current technology, but we'll be on the next one and we'll win that one, because exactly the same issues and problems apply. In my strong view, it's very important for Europe to get an edge in the current technology and know how to produce, be it LFP or NMC batteries, and as part of that, scale in manufacturing, invest and learn and start doing the new chemistries. Because the reality is that the companies today that are most advanced in things like sodium ion are exactly the same companies that are number one in the current battery technology, for example, CATL. So we just need to we learn how to make batteries, and we attach new generations and learning to this. The biggest problem that we have in Europe is inability to move from great research and great pilots to scale manufacturing. Companies either go to America to scale and get IP, etc., or they manufacture in China. And even if our engineers and researchers will do the best sodium ion or whatever future chemistry will be, they will face the same barrier scaling it here in Europe. So policy targeted at commercialization and scale, including investment support, including trade defense mechanisms, is really critical. And let me just add one small point, because I saw a comment on this in the chat about costs. So yes, many people, of course, Andreas, you see it, you are in business. It's true, in Europe we have higher labor costs, we have high energy costs. I don't question that. But we also sometimes forget in all of this to look at what's happening elsewhere. Salaries have also been rising very quickly in China, actually, to the point where some companies are looking at India today to deliver the savings in their manufacturing. And there has been an in-depth analysis by Bloomberg NEF that actually shows that by 2030, overall costs included in Europe, countries like Poland and Hungary can completely compete with a Chinese battery supply chain on costs. So it is possible also in Europe, but key to this is scale, learning, as well as high automation in factories. Back to you, Simon.
Thanks so much, Julia. You know, there's a lot of questions coming in. That's the usual. So really appreciate that. That's always in the last minutes, but we want to make sure we get through some of them. I think there's definitely also some interesting comments from Brian. I might go to them in a moment. But I think there's also quite a specific from Panindra has a really interesting question about terahertz inspection techniques emerging on EV battery electrodes for improved quality. I'm not sure if there's too much we can add to that from our speakers, but maybe more in general, Andreas, also maybe on quality control. I know that's a big topic, especially from cells. We heard some stories from different regions, some of the challenges they had, and some of the quality control, but overall, of course, quality going up. But maybe if you could share a bit more on that, kind of some of the innovation maybe you see, or maybe also from your perspective on quality control for cells, if there's anything interesting to share.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say, I've been now in mass production of lithium-ion battery cell for more than 12 years. And I used to be the head of quality for automotive battery cells at Samsung SDI. And the focus has always been on a very high degree of inspection of every process. We had very good traceability. And I would say the battery industry has been probably more advanced than other kind of automotive parts production I have seen. I'm not so familiar with other industries, but definitely it has been always to a very high degree ensuring kind of 100% inline inspection from powder input to end-of-line inspection along the entire process chain. And therefore, I would say quality inspection is or has been quite advanced from my perspective. Also due to the fact that battery cell is a safety relevant product. And therefore, yeah, the requirements or the customer expectations on that level have been very high. So now, where does the future go? I think in terms of inspection and in terms of data processing, I would say the trend and the focus goes towards yield improvements. And I mean, those who are in battery production know that a lot of the defects are only identified at the end of the line when defects are very costly. So you find like high self-discharge or other defects, capacity defects in the finished cell. And to trace those defects back to the entire process chain, because you have controlled all your processes and all the processes have been within your control limits, but at the end still it resulted in a not good cell. And to kind of make use of this data through learning systems, through artificial intelligence, I believe is where the future lies. That is one thing, and through that also enable yourself to reduce kind of throughput times. And the significant element of the throughput time is the aging in the formation, and to kind of identify defects without kind of weeks of aging. I believe that is where you can improve yields and reduce costs, and that's where I see the trends going at the moment. Yeah, that was a long answer to a simple question, but I hope it kind of puts it in the proper perspective.
I really appreciate it. Yeah, and super, thankful for all of your experience you already had, as you said, from also on the other side with Samsung SDI, looking at automotive there, and I think some of your takeaways, really appreciate them. Then I think we have one more question, and there's kind of a couple of them, and I will put them into one for you, Julia, looking at topic of cobalt related to batteries. And I think that's interesting, and I know also from previous discussions, I know little battery lines and other initiatives, that's a topic you have, I think, also been in touch with. There's a question about why we are trying to eliminate all the cobalt. Maybe it's also a bit connected to you, Andreas, actually, looking at the technologies you're pushing forward on LFP specifically, and different versions of it. But there's a question of why do we try to replace cobalt, I think? Is it only because of, the DSC and some of the ethical considerations there, but isn't there something should only be, would it make more sense to focus on that and improve that? Or there are also other factors. I mean, I can already read one in, I guess, environmental factors is one to maybe share as well. But maybe, Julia, if you could share a bit more about why, you see maybe the shift away from cobalt, or maybe some of your thoughts on that.
So historically, pre-COVID, there has been a big shift away from cobalt, and I believe that it's actually for two reasons. The first reason was always the cost of cobalt. Cobalt added a lot of cost to battery cells, and removing it with other cheaper materials was helping those producing batteries to make them more affordable, and therefore electric cars more affordable. It's no longer the case because we shifted from cobalt too far away, and today there's oversupply in the market. But back in 2019, that was definitely number one consideration. And the second consideration was indeed what you mentioned already, Simon. On top of the cost, there was also, a lot of so-called blood on that cobalt, or basically a lot of ESG and issues and concerns, especially around child labor in DRC and in the so-called artisanal mining sector. So in a way, you put two and two together, you have, sometimes you do not have an alternative. In this case, you had the alternative. LFP batteries were really gaining momentum, and it became quite obvious that it is a solution. Having said that, I do feel for those that are investing in cobalt, having now worked for many years on critical raw materials, I do find it a little bit over. So cobalt just became a bit of a poster child. So many exactly the same problems exist in pretty much every other supply chain. In fact, and I believe it's not without the help of some in the oil industry, the cobalt problem became so huge. No one talks about real problems anymore. By volume, do you know what's the most mined material in the world? It's actually coal. What's the most mined metal in the world? It's actually gold. And gold is suffering from exactly the same issues around artisanal mining, illegal mining, child labor, etc., etc. So we are really experiencing, I think, a slightly unfair situation. Yes, there are problems with cobalt, but they're not about cobalt. They're about industry as such. And answers lie in much stricter rules around mining across the world. All the best practices, be it on safety, corruption, human rights, or environmental aspects, all the best practices and technologies are there to eliminate most harms. They're just not consistently applied. And applying them would really improve the lives of many people across the world around mines, be it cobalt, gold, nickel, or anything else. So this is really what we are lacking today. We are lacking those improvements, and this is what we as TNE is trying to work on, for example, by being a member of IRMA, Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, which is the best, genuinely co-run by unions, NGOs, civil society, the indigenous people and industry standard to really improve those conditions on the ground. So we don't just follow headlines, but instead make meaningful progress on the ground where it matters.
Really appreciate these insights, Julia, and I think some of your work. Andreas, is there anything you wanted to share on that?
I think you touched on all the important points. I mean, from the cobalt, yeah, I mean, as you correctly said, it's definitely the most costly of the elements that go into a battery active material. However, there has been a lot of effort to reduce the amount, right? I mean, the NMC, we are now applying in some high performance automotive cell NMC 9.5.5, so meaning cobalt is really dramatically reduced, and it came a long way from the NMC 111 that was applied with the first electric vehicles that came to market only 10 years ago. And so there has been a lot of effort, and now, of course, the next step is to go to cobalt-free, or it has already happened, right? With the LFP, it is also cobalt-free material, and it has taken the inroads into automotive battery cells, and the share will increase more and more. Yeah, so the trend is clear that we move away from cobalt. However, there will be always a space also for cobalt chemistry, and it's a matter of, okay, how big will that share be in the future?
Great, thank you so much. I think with this, we are unfortunately out of time for the public part. There's some really great questions also from Serkan and Taha, and all of these discussions also in the chat. So please keep them going. We also will try to look at them later on. So if you have additional questions, please also add more of them in the chat, and we can try to address some of them. There's also many other questions here in the chat right now from this cohort. So we're going to go to them in a moment. But yeah, for today, I really want to thank all of you who watched us live or watched as a recording for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Again, if you're interested in joining the Battery MBA program, don't miss out on the application deadline for the next cohort on the 18th of December for the January cohort. Again, already love you applied, and we really enjoy interviewing you all and speaking to you all. But yeah, please make sure you apply if you want to join. There'll also be an open case study coming up in the weeks to come as well, where we highlight one of the case studies from this cohort. But yeah, with this, really appreciate all of you joining us for today, and hopefully see many of you in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you very much for the discussion.
Fantastic. And I think now we can all relax a moment. So we're going to be able now to unmute ourselves. We're not live anymore. So this was the live show. Really, really appreciate Marco, Miguel, Jandro, all of you to have here as well. Clemens, really, really good to see you. Feel free to turn on your video if you want. Now we're under us. So a bit more intimate. And we can see each other, and also our speakers, panelists can see the team. Wonderful. Really, really good to have you. Maybe with this, Shada, I will pass over to you to ask the first question, which was, I think, yes,
thank you, Simon. I think I'm gonna give first question Abhinav. Abhinav, you would like to ask the question to the panelists?
Yeah, thank you for the panel discussion and the opportunity to ask. But I believe you already covered in one of our answers this question. So yes, it is already answered. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Okay. High labor cost. All right. So we got the second question, I think. Said question.
Yeah, it was a question from me. Like currently, the Europe is working on transitioning to the sustainable development. So how do you envision the hydrogen fuel cells when compared to EVs? Currently, I'm studying hydrogen technology. So that was the question I wanted, and how the Europe is like trying to integrate this technology in its energy systems. So where does Simon see this technology, hydrogen technology, in the near future?
Thanks so much. I think Julia is a great person to address that maybe first.
Yes, I'm happy to address that. I'll maybe address it in two parts. So first of all, where do we as a transport organization see the role of fuel cells, or just maybe more broadly hydrogen? Within the overall energy transition, hydrogen has an important role to play, certainly has a role to play in, for example, decarbonizing materials such as steel via direct reduction, right? That's where the focus has been, but also in some of the, within transport, heavy duty sectors. So aviation and shipping today, on the current knowledge we have, to really decarbonize them at scale in terms of global operations, you would require green hydrogen derived fuels. So you need a hydrogen economy for that, notably electrolyzers and the synthesis technology, so you can produce synthetic kerosene for aviation, or synthetic ammonia, for example, or methanol for shipping. So there is a huge role. And by the way, just to produce the 1% mandate that we have for those synthetic aviation fuels for aviation by 2030 requires enormous investments that are not yet there to take place to be on time by 2030. So it's not negligible sectors that I'm saying. To meet that demand is already very, very difficult. However, in the road transport, we believe there's a very small role for hydrogen fuel cells, given their higher costs, lower efficiency, and therefore just more broadly look at how hard it is already to scale the battery value chain. Imagine scaling something which is 3 times more expensive because it is actually required 3 times more energy. So it's just not really happening. And it's not me saying this, the numbers are saying this. So actually last year, for the first time, Bloomberg NEF dropped completely fuel cell costs from their modeling and from their scenarios for light duty vehicles, because they just were so small they couldn't show them on the graph, and they kept not growing, right? So there's no role really in light duty. There might be some role in heavy duty, so in trucks, but we still believe it's somewhere around 5-10% of the market, not more, because as you scale batteries, the economics make it a lot easier to electrify trucks, and the same scale is not happening in truck. But there are some applications. A mining truck in Sweden, in the north, is a good example. Probably will definitely go hydrogen. So I wanted to share that, but I wanted just to make a second observation, if I may. So it's very, so some people say, well, look, we're struggling with batteries, let's go to hydrogen. But actually working in an organization that spends equally as much time to scale green hydrogen, I can tell you that the things on the green hydrogen side are even worse when it comes to this. So green hydrogen investments are not going forward. Very few definitive investment decisions have been taken. Given such high capital costs, companies cannot find off-takers. So actually, similar issues that are happening, or comparable issues that are happening in the battery value chain, are happening double in the green supply chain. And similarly, very targeted industrial policy is needed there to reach even the no regrets options such as aviation and shipping, where we need hydrogen, let alone having free flowing hydrogen for other sectors to use.
So, do you think like the trucks are going to be able to drive quite a lot of miles with the EVs? Because it's because hydrogen is like considered as a replacement for the like high duty vehicles, like the trucks mainly. For the small vehicles, we can use the EVs, but for hydrogen is considered as a replacement for trucks. Like Germany has invested a lot on their hydrogen infrastructure. They are having more than, I guess, 400 refueling stations, and they are currently also working. But investors aren't agreeing with it. So this was the clue I was asking. Like, are the batteries efficient enough to power the truck for like long ranges?
So what we see in Europe, and we've done a very dedicated analysis actually on this, we do see that in Europe already today, batteries can power up to 80% of all the truck operations. The rules in Europe is that after every 450 kilometers, or I think 4 hours of driving, you have to take a mandatory break. And this makes it ideal as recharging time, and it makes batteries simply feasible. From the total cost point of view, battery trucks are significantly cheaper than hydrogen, so there's also economics there. And on hydrogen, there's of course, so I feel that there will be users of this in the heavy trucks market. They just won't be the major, your kind of urban and regional delivery. What I do suggest you look at, and so for me it was a surprise. So just like you, I always thought, well, but hydrogen can have the same range as diesel. You should have a look at a few models currently on the market, hydrogen models, at their range. Their range can't even beat electric in some cases, because even if in theory it's possible, in practice, the current technology, the safety implications, where do you keep the hydrogen truck, mean that actually hydrogen trucks right now on the market do not have a long range. So they're almost going against their own story in reality.
Okay.
Can I add something to this? I mean, since you
Yeah, sure.
we're asking on the kind of the future of hydrogen and fuel cells in mobility. I think that is what your question is. I mean, in fact, fuel cells have been around for quite a long time. I remember in the early 2000s, there was really almost every automotive OEM had prototypes of fuel cell cars on the road. And at least for some time, the expectation was that this would be already replacing the combustion engine by the end of the 2010 or 2015. I don't remember exactly what the predictions were at the time. However, the key challenge was what is still the challenge today. Fuel cell is very expensive, much more expensive than a battery electric powertrain. And then you still have the challenge of the infrastructure. Where do you get the hydrogen supplied? And then the third, much bigger challenge is how do you generate hydrogen? And probably all these are too big of barriers that hydrogen and fuel cells made inroads as into the mobility segment. Now, of course, there's still at least by some manufacturers, expectations that hydrogen may be suitable for heavy duty trucks, but that's still yet to be seen, as now we get very good performing electric trucks based on battery as a energy supply source on the market. And yeah, I believe, putting all that in perspective, there may be a niche, but it will not be a mainstream, at least in where the trends currently are going.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you very much for the question, Said, and thank you for the panelists comparing us and giving us their perspective on hydrogen fuel cell. Next question will be, there's two questions from Carla. Carla, you wanna ask them? I think one for directed to Julia, but the other can be for both panelists, I think.
I think I can ask. I think the connection is not good. I can ask it for her.
Yeah.
Her first question is, what can Europe learn from Northvolt's recent experience, failures in pursuing the battery supply chain and ambitions, and maybe not just Europe, right? Maybe beyond, because we have a very international cohort as well. Maybe some of your learnings could be helpful. And then there's a second question, which is, I think, directed for you, Julia, which I think was about the CO2 emissions from Europe. And that's, if Poland is to compete, won't their CO2 emissions also be high? To discuss with China's grid emissions question for Julia. So maybe both of you, if you have any thoughts on Northvolt and learnings from that for Europe as beyond, and then maybe the question about CO2 and Poland for Julia second.
Maybe Andreas, you want to go first, and then I can go and answer both questions.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you said it, Julia, you said it at the beginning already. Sometimes, I mean, it requires a long breath, right? And it's not all successful at the first time. I mean, we all have to recognize that battery cell production is a quite complex process because you have to master quite fundamentally different processes from mixing to electrode production to assembly to finally formation. And yeah, each process by itself is quite complex, at least to the tolerances and to also the precision you have to operate these, and then putting that in combination makes it even more challenging. It requires a lot of knowledge, but also experience. And it also takes time to tune your processes to a high yield operation. As I said before, of course, data analysis and other tools help in that process. However, it also comes to a large extent down to the experience you have to gain. And yeah, it has, in the case of Northvolt, we all know they have tried to improve their processes, improve yields for quite a long time. And in this process also kind of required a lot of capital, which now led them to the measure that they have taken in the past days. But nevertheless, I mean, it's I think it's really critical for the European industry, if they want to make it happen, to show commitment and not revert back with the first big drawback. Even though, having said that, of course, for all the investors, it's kind of very hard, right? After having invested, I think the actual equity that was invested is something like 8 billion, and that is a massive number, 8 billion euros, and then they have received 5 to 6 billion again in grants and funds. It's of course a lot of money, but then again, it has gone in a lot of assets as well. So yeah, it's overcoming that failure, and I also believe that if they refocus and really also focus on the key initiatives they have, they will be able to manage a turnaround. But of course, it requires support of them, and yeah, it's caused a discussion where is this financial support coming from? Is it from governments? Is it from unions? From the European Union or from other sources, private investors, is to be seen. Yeah.
Maybe I can just build on, because I agree fully with Andreas' points. So maybe just to build a little bit on that, to add a few more maybe granular ideas around policies, specifically for Europe, and to answer the question about Poland. So it's a long game, and we need to learn to play a long game in Europe. We're not very good at that. And here it's just really important, before I maybe point out a few policies, just to highlight the geopolitical global dynamics of all of this. So in China last year, Chinese capacity, battery manufacturing capacity, was 2.2 terawatt hours. It's 3 times more than the demand in China, and it's significantly more than the global demand. So it's significant overcapacity aimed to really capture the market. And they are excellent high quality batteries. And they are all arriving today to Europe, given this overcapacity, at low cost and an import tariff of 1.3%. So here comes your first problem. If that's your import tariff, if that's your barrier to entry, vis-a-vis that high quality batteries, you're not going to get anywhere. At the same time, on the other side of the Atlantic, the US under the Biden administration have announced and are now have in place the US Inflation Reduction Act. We all know about this, and this has been really also a deal breaker in the US. What is quite important to stress here is that the initial budget of 369 billion is just the initial floor. In reality, many, like Credit Suisse, show that it's $1.2 trillion that ultimately will go, given all the projects in the pipeline, with 2/3 of that money just go into the battery value chain. So this is what we're competing with. So here we have a very low import tariff on the one hand, so we can easily capture those cheap batteries to the detriment of our own homegrown industry efforts. On the other hand, we have this incredible pool of capital in the US. What does Europe have? Beyond national subsidies, we do have a battery fund that was announced. It's 3 billion. So it's 3 billion over 3 years versus 1.2 trillion in the US. We have very strict fiscal rules in Europe, to the point where in Germany the market is collapsing, but no one can do anything. I mean, that's really an own goal. And we are, even though we have those 3 billion, we've spent over a year in delays, unable to get the money out of the door. And finally, the first call for proposals under this battery fund will hopefully, after all this time, will come out next week. So these are already 2 failures. Even if you don't have much money, do it quickly. No, trade absolutely needs we need to launch an investigation in the battery cells and raise tariffs. And on top of that, what we are not doing is we are not making local manufacturing in Europe a necessity or attractive for off-takers like car makers to actually be serious when it comes to really spending time and money and effort and having patience as it takes to scale European manufacturing. And here I can bring just one example around European carbon footprint rules for batteries. They were always supposed to be there to support local manufacturing in Europe, to give it an edge, because our grid is so much cleaner. It's really our advantage. But again, it's been marred in conflict and political disagreements between France and Germany, and we again can't agree, can't get them out of the door. So companies that did invest in locations like Sweden or Norway, basing their factories also on that greener, lower carbon footprint, are not rewarded because we're still not putting that policy in place. So these are just a number of policies: trade, local content or carbon footprint and investments that we are missing. That we need to get our act together, and we can do it. And if it all comes together, it can still help. And the final answer to that question about Poland. So Poland, like any other European country, is bound by European emissions trading system, as well as the binding renewable energy targets by 2030. And Poland will also have to decarbonize their grid. So I'm a bit less concerned that carbon footprint in Poland will be exactly the same as in China, very high, because Poland is also decarbonizing. Maybe for some, like those of us in France or Sweden, not quick enough, but they're also decarbonizing. And already today, just to really stress that before this question comes, we are not advocating for electric vehicles on coal. This is not what we do at all. However, on a full life cycle analysis, an electric vehicle which is driven in Poland on the current Polish grid is already at least 30% better than a comparable petrol or diesel car. So it still makes sense to electrify and go electric. Over.
Thanks so much for sharing. We really appreciate this insight. And yeah, it's also kind of, I think, from, as you also touched on, right? I think on the history with Northvolt and, with the mission to build the greenest battery. I think that's also an interesting aspect, right? And I think the question is now, which company is that? And hopefully, it gets taken forward by others. And I'm sure, and Morrow has their own ambitions. And yeah, so I think there's other companies pushing forward in that regards as well. Then there's another question from Kinson. Would you like to go on the Chinese government investments?
Hi, I guess you kind of cover a little bit of it. As I understand, the Chinese government invests heavily in the battery industry. I mean, they probably done this for many, many years now. And I guess they do not just on the manufacturing side, but everything from the fundamental all the way to the production. Can EU essentially or any other countries do the same and be able to kind of provide that kind of investment to accelerate that battery activity? I guess, it's not just about the battery manufacturing or the production of it as such, but also, they also kind of got into other countries and, invest into the mining, and they are also covering the supply chain, doing like the refineries, and essentially everything from them start to finish, they got the battery manufacturing covered. Can Europe or any other country do essentially the same thing? Because, right now we're just talking a small piece and we're already saying that there's not enough resource or there's not enough money or capital, and, we're struggling. So what can the EU do, for example?
So the EU certainly can. The question is if politically they agree to do this, right? The question is not lack of money following. I mean, we can bring all the way to the banking crisis and how we all found money to save the banks. But just more recently, post-COVID, Europe came together and they put together what is called Next Generation EU. So a huge pot of money borrowed on private markets globally to rebuild the economies, with a lot of money going on big infrastructure projects. So similar thing can be done. We call it Next Generation 2.0, focusing on clean tech. So it's absolutely can be done. You just need political leadership to do that. But I think one thing that you mentioned there is actually quite important. Indeed, we've been focusing a lot on battery cells, but we will not be able to build a supply chain without focusing on all the parts of the supply chain. And just to really stress, it doesn't mean that all the companies have to be European, not at all. We also support Asian, Chinese, South Korean investments in Europe, for example, in cells, but also further down the line. But we also need quite a targeted support, especially at midstream. This is what we're really missing. For me, in my view, mining is global. I don't think that's where most subsidies are. And mining today is global. It just all goes to China to be processed. So what we really lack in Europe is any midstream or significant midstream processing capacity. So even when we do mine lithium or cobalt in Europe, it doesn't have to go to China because we're missing the next step. It can also be processed locally and then be shifted, for example, to companies like Andreas's Morrow Batteries, so they can make cells out of it. So the bigger missing piece today for me is that midstream supply chain, precursors, cathodes. That's where a lot more funding is needed. And when we talk about investments now, we really talk about operational support, so production-based OPEX, scaling support, etc. Because in Europe, we have fantastic research support already. Research and kind of your first initiation is all there. What's really missing is the next phase, to actually produce commercially, which is today difficult at the beginning when the costs are higher, volumes lower, and energy and labor costs are high in Europe. So that OPEX support is where I would really focus if I was a politician in the coming years, which is exactly what the US IRA is doing.
Michelle, we cannot hear you.
Thank you very much, Julia, for answering Carla's question. And now we can continue with, I think the next
Clemens.
question is Clemens, yeah.
Hi. What I'm finding is always interesting how much bureaucracy we have in Europe to get things done, to get an agreement to build something, to build a new plant, or to build exclusions from whatever. It can take months and years until we get the okay. And I feel if we would have less bureaucracy in Europe, we would be quicker in getting the battery industry going, and also we would be more competitive against as a part of the globe. Is there anything coming up, or is there anything in place to reduce the bureaucracy for the battery market in Europe?
Maybe I can just comment quickly on the policies, but Andreas, you maybe have more practical experience of this as you're actually going through this as a project. So I agree with the spirit of your question, and I have to say that this is something that people in Brussels or leadership in Brussels understood and are really trying to change. So in the last 12 months, a number of laws were passed, from Critical Raw Materials Act to Net Zero Industry Act. And while the money is not there, what is there is simplification of permitting procedures. So some of those key sectors, batteries are included, in critical minerals. There is an effort in the next few years to really streamline and simplify permitting. A good example here can be a country like France, that is definitely not known for lean or stream processes, but has been doing a lot recently to really speed up the permitting for some of these industrial facilities, right? So, however, we just need to consider the other side of it. Quite often the problem is that some of these local authorities, inundated with these permits, haven't permitted a new mine or a battery factory ever. So there is a genuine lack of expertise and personnel, and without supporting those local authorities, it also won't happen. So support is needed on both sides, faster permitting, digitalized permitting, but also just more resources and training for the staff to do their job better.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe to comment a little bit on this from a practical perspective. Actually, the permitting was, in our case, not an issue at all. The local government and also the national government was quite supportive in accelerating permits. So in the entire process, that has not been a challenge. And I mean, you can also use another example, Northvolt in the north of Germany. I mean, they already started construction with also quite a lot of funding by the German government in place. And that's where I also do not quite agree with the argument that in Europe, companies don't get enough government support or government funding, because the reality was, out of the planned 5 billion euro investment in Heide in northern Germany, 800 million came from the German government as grants, and not even loans. So it was, yeah, in simple words, free money to them. and it's 20% of your total capex invest is not insignificant. So I think we should also put that in perspective. However, where we see challenges in permitting is actually when it comes to environmental permits. And that applies in particular to the upstream supply chain, where there have been challenges in the past that even factories that were completely established could not go into operation because the environmental permit was missing. And there are examples of hard lessons learned already existing in Europe. And yeah, of course, that has to be certainly to be addressed in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Much appreciated. There's another question from Ganeshan. He asked me to ask on his behalf. His question is a follow-up from the question on LinkedIn on the post-lithium-ion batteries. Considering the early-stage nature of sodium-ion battery technology and commercial applications, what advice would you give a startup or researchers who are seeking to transition from laboratory-scale innovation to large-scale commercialization? What role do investors play in this process, and what metrics do you think are most important to attract funding for such project? Andreas, Julia, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I start. I mean, when it comes to the chemistry discussion, sodium ion, LFP, NMC, future solid state, I believe there is room for all those chemistries. If you go a year back, there was a big hype about sodium ion being the next kind of chemistry to take a main stage. However, with the reduction in material prices, yesterday I read that lithium in the past 12 months has really reduced in price dramatically. And therefore, companies like CATL, they have paused their sodium ion initiatives and put more emphasis on LFP because it's currently more cost efficient than sodium ion, besides all the other challenges it has. However, things may change again. We don't know where we stand in 12 months, in 24 months, and 36 months. And therefore, I see that there is a mix of chemistries for dedicated applications, which require or which have certain requirements and therefore a preferred chemistry. Whether it's sodium ion, LFP, LMFP, high nickel NMC, or future solid state with really very high energy density, however, being also more costly than what we see as mainstream technologies today.
Maybe just two quick words from my side. Well, of course, I'm not in business, so Andreas's remarks here are more relevant. I would just say, number one, make sure you have all the right partnerships with people who, one, can actually do scaled manufacturing, tier one suppliers, etc. And two, partnerships with key off-takers like car makers that would really ease the ability to access funding, including with banks, etc. So that's really important. And maybe the second thing, just to mention around sodium ion in particular, what I've seen again and again is that straight away going for the EV market for some of those newer technologies is not always the best option. And I very much agree with what Andreas was saying today. I think the appetite from EV manufacturers has waned because lithium prices are low again. So start with less demanding applications where you can learn, scale, and then apply these learnings to more demanding, high qualification sectors such as EVs. So maybe start first with some machinery equipment, for example, or with energy storage, and then aim for the EV market.
Thanks for sharing. And as Andreas, in your case, actually, I know you have won a partnership also with Ekion and some of the XNO materials, and we did our PhDs together in Cambridge. So there's, I've definitely seen some of these partnerships panning out quite nicely, at least from the outside. Perfect. I think that's.
I want to interrupt just to remind our feedback link feedback form. I'm going to just drop in the chat because it's getting late now. Before we close, if you have a minute, we would appreciate your feedback on this session. And I would love to also take a group picture before taking Ian's. I know, Ian, you have a last question, but if we can get the group picture first and then go to your question, that would be amazing. So if you want to be on this lecture picture, so I would just take a nice screenshot here. Thank you very much, all. So the last question is from Ian. Ian.
Yeah, great information there. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'd just like to know what your comments are really on Freya. I mean, especially Andreas, you're in Norway. So, yeah, they're transitioning away from, or the apparent transition away from battery manufacturing to solar cell. They recently bought Trina Solar in the US. And I've heard they're going to cancel Giga America. I mean, they had all the backing and all, they had even had machines at CQP. So it seems like they had everything in place already. So I was wondering why they would suddenly steer away from battery.
Well, that's a challenging question, actually. I mean, Freya, they tried to be very innovative, right, with the 24M technology.
Yeah.
What can I say? From everything I hear, it still has a lot of industrialization challenges to overcome. While it's probably in its fundamentals very innovative, but of course it also requires the skills and the capabilities to make such a or to bring such a technology to mass production, if it's at all possible. And they seem to have abandoned that track, at least in Norway, focused then on building up, from what I hear, LFP-based battery production in the US. That I don't know how attractive that eventually was, and then shifted now further up in the supply chain, as they have always been focusing on energy storage and integrating into a solar panel production. I don't know whether it's still part of their strategy or their business model to integrate back into cell and storage production in the future. However, that is a step they have taken and yet to be seen. However, I mean, having said that, also solar cell production, similar to batteries, is a very, very challenging segment to be in, right? There's also huge cost pressure with a very mature supply chain in Asia. But I'm not so deep in their strategy, so I don't know what that move meant, but certainly a very interesting one.
I can't say much about Spray. I'm not an expert. I would only add, I'm aware that they have changed their CEO quite a few times in the last 2 years, I think 3 times, and that's never a good sign.
Yeah, I agree. But the share price is good now.
Brilliant. I really, really appreciate it. And of course, we can discuss also more of this in the office hours. Of course, we also have quite a few case studies to discuss then. But yeah, for today, I really want to thank both you, Julia, and Andreas, for sharing your insights. Really, really appreciate them. It was wonderful to have you. And yeah, we will be in touch. And then, yeah, for all the core participants, hopefully you're excited for your final week. Again, I want to recommend to not miss out on the case and office hours if you can, as we're discussing these case studies, and there's a lot of work put in there from your fellow participants if you're not presenting yourself. So I think that's definitely something you don't want to miss out on if you can. Then, of course, we see you all also in the graduation on Saturday. Great time to also celebrate all the accomplishment in this cohort. And again, big thanks to you, Julia and Andreas, and we'll be in touch. And thank you all. See each other soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.